Welcome to Combos from the Couch by LifeStance Health, where leading mental health professionals help guide you on your journey to a healthier, more fulfilling life. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Combos from the Couch. I'm Nicolette Leanza, and joining me today is LifeStance therapist Edward Collins, author of the book Fear Itself: The Nature of Fear and Its Value to the Human Race. So we're diving deep into one of humanity's most primal and misunderstood emotions, fear. So welcome, Ed. Great to have you on again.
Great to be on again.
So as we dive in, what got you interested in this topic of fear?
I have a deep and abiding love for the subject because I'm an October baby. And so
Ah,
I grew up having Halloween birthdays. And it progressed from that from a young age to me being a big fan of the old horror movies. Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy and
oh,
Frankenstein.
yes.
And to the point that for Christmas every year, I would always get some type of scary mask and would actually get in one of the old reel to reel movies that my parents would get for me so that I could play it on their little home projector.
I just
And
love that.
it has been a lifelong interest, let's put it that way. I've got the experience with in the early days working in haunted houses, helping design them. Um,
Wow.
I have an undergrad degree in dramatic arts with a big concentration in theater makeup, so very much always interested in it.
I
But with
see.
that said,
Yeah.
the other piece of it was that through the years, observing people's reactions to fear, observing how they did not respond in a way that would make sense in these artificial fear constructs, like a haunted house, like a scary movie, where you understand at some level that it's not real, but
Mhm.
you're willing to suspend the disbelief to allow that fear reaction to enter in a controllable, governable way, which I found
Mhm.
fascinating to watch.
Yeah, extremely fascinating for sure. So we're gonna jump in and ask you the key question: why do we fear fear?
It is a matter of control that we will fear things that are beyond our control. We know this working particularly in therapy, particularly with people that are struggling with events in their lives, that we know that the greatest challenge is to accept that change, that
Mhm.
perception of threat to our stability. What else is fear than a perception of threat to stability? And it's primal. It comes to us through a tremendous long lineage of accepting, tolerating, pushing our acceptance level of it, and ultimately conquering fear to achieve things.
Love that, to achieve things. Because oftentimes people aren't reframing it from that point of view to be able
Mhm.
to achieve things, which leads me to the question, how can fear teach us or educate us? Because I think that falls right in line with that. Tell us more about that.
Sure. Fear is an educational tool in that as we approach something that is new, something that may cause us a sense of discomfort, knowing that on the other side of that sense of discomfort, there may actually be a sense of mastery that comes with it. The
Mhm.
only way through that discomfort, which we can refer to as fear, is to push through it, is to find something inside of us that is willing to engage with it and to push through to the other side, thus gaining mastery over our fear. It is, to me, probably the reason that people do go to scary movies, that they do go to haunted house venues at this time of year, that a lot of that source, that essential humanity that comes from that feeling of having our energy rise in that fight or flight moment where we become self-protective and we're
Mhm.
pushing back against our environment. And I think that if we allow it to, that informs us on how to be better, to get better, to rise above. They often said that courage is not the lack of fear, but courage is instead being willing to confront fear.
Yes. Yes, that's actually one of my favorite quotes right there. I agree. That's what it is. So, if we specify a little bit more here, how are fear, anxiety related?
Ah, I've learned through the years in working in mental health that stress and anxiety are akin to each other, but obviously not the same thing. Stress is required. Stress is a necessary function, as in many ways is fear. We learn fear as a young child. We learn to fear things that are endangering. These things can cause a level of stress if they are around us, if they're there and we have to do something with them. Anxiety is when we lack the ability to release them, when we don't achieve that mastery of our fear, if you will. We don't
Hmm.
achieve that sense that the stressor only exists because we permit it to exist in our space. If we move past that stressor, if we gain confidence and a comfortable sense of who we are, then the stressors don't ever build up to an anxiety level. Now, when you are confronted with fear that appears to be unrelenting, that
Hmm.
too can invite in anxiety. That goes beyond that level of stress. But those situations are relatively rare in life. I can think of a couple instances that we can think of being placed in a position where there seems to be nothing we can do to control the situation, and we succumb to that sense of fear. That's where you don't go into the fight or flight mode, but instead you're going into freeze or perhaps
Yeah,
fawn. Those other two that we don't speak about as much.
right. I agree. But you alluded before about some reasons why people might purposely want to take in things like horror films and haunted houses. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of those reasons why we might deliberately scare ourselves?
It is probably the same reason that we get onto a roller coaster,
Mm.
probably the same reason that some people do risk-taking behaviors.
Yeah.
It is a connection to that dopamine bump that we get, that exhilaration we get. It's why I can put it in personal terms and say the first time I ever jumped out of an airplane, the feeling was overwhelming. There was a pause moment of about 5 seconds, and if someone wants to hear it even more eloquently said than me, look up the actor Will Smith's testimony about the first time he jumped out of an airplane, which was during the same summer that I did for the first time.
Oh, wow.
And he does a very good job of explaining that 5-second moment, that
Mhm.
5-second moment where you are so paralyzed by the decision you just made that they literally will grab you, they being a person who's harnessed to your back or
Yeah.
a photographer, grab you by an arm or a leg and shake you and call your name as you're falling to the earth at
So
120 miles an hour.
so they know this is a typical response, so
Yes.
they're literally, like, trying to snap you back, snap you
Yes.
out of that.
Yes.
Wow, that's
Yes.
fascinating.
But
Wow.
what's amazing to me is how quickly that all of that sensation dissipated in the moment, in the grandeur, in the amazing spectacle of the moment. All of that fear faded away. That I didn't fear moving towards the ground and relying on a sheet of cloth that was going to keep me from hitting the ground at 120 miles an hour. That wasn't even in my head. It was the enjoyment of the moment. I think that we perceive that in these fear experience moments as well. That we perceive that if we can push through to the other side of this, there will be fun, enjoyment, joy that will accompany it. And there is that sense of, I survived this. Look, I'm
Yeah.
alive and I survived. There
Right,
was never a question if we were going to when we see it, when we go to the movies and see Pennywise the clown, and then it's
right,
terrifying. Or
right.
when we go into a haunted house and somebody jumps out with a chainsaw, we
Yeah,
know that there is no saw on this. We
right.
understand, that. But that in that split second, we are in that moment. And that is a
Mhm.
very primal,
Yeah.
huge emotion.
Yes, that it is. And to think that huge emotion that we're moving towards that, we purposely put ourselves in it deliberately to feel that. I think these little things just help us feel alive, gets
Mhm.
our heart pumping and our blood rushing. Yeah.
If we separate some of the other emotions, there are some that are within our grasp fairly readily, but there are some that are not. So if we equate fear and love, for instance, so we can experience fear through a number of external, internal mechanisms, if you will. We cannot experience love in that same way. Love is love approaches us differently. We have a different
Yeah.
connection to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can sometimes find humor in that same way, but humor is very subjective. So, of those 3 big ones, which would be love, laughter, and fear ends up being the most accessible. Is closest to where we can
Yeah.
actually turn on the TV and get a little bite of it, or go someplace and experience it,
Right.
or whistle past the cemetery in the dark. There's so many conventions that
Yeah.
exist with it.
Yeah. Excellent point. Any other insights you'd like to share?
You have to give credence to the fact that as of last year, I believe, the number one holiday in the United States is no longer Christmas. It's Halloween.
Wow.
And it,
Wow.
as a huge holiday that is celebrated in many other cultures around the world, we have to acknowledge why. We have to get a feeling for how we're drawn to that. And does that indeed give us a window to our own humanity in somewhat of a different way? Do we
Mhm.
then perceive ourselves differently as creatures that are not drawn to love necessarily, although that is certainly part of our cosmetology, but instead we want that rush of adrenaline, want
Mhm.
that rush of dopamine that we know has a ready source.
I agree 100% with what you're sharing there. As I see in your background, for those our listeners who are maybe not able to see it, obviously, you have some quotes up there, and one is "What we resist persists," notated back to Carl Jung. But
Mm.
I think that's also when someone is debilitated by their fear, that's it's paralyzing them. Them resisting the fear is just going to persist it. So as you're sharing
Mhm.
earlier in our conversation, it is mastering it, is moving through it. So I think that's a perfect quote right there.
And I
Definitely.
absolutely am enamored with Carl Jung's later work, particularly. And even when we're talking about fear, talking about the shadow, talking about the other,
Right.
that constant companion we have that can be a force of negativity, certainly. It can be a force of raw emotional power, for lack
Mhm.
of a better term for what it can be. And what it is, how we title it, how we use it, how we confront it, all speaks to our baseline humanity, all speaks to our connection to life and how we, in the culture that we live in and so many other cultures around the world, how we're drawn to religion based on
Mhm.
fear. That there
Yeah.
is a key component of some of our structural foundational beliefs that are attached to a fear reaction. Again, it all starts to lead back in. If you think about the connection between fear and even human sexuality, there's an interesting one, and I know we don't have much time to dive into this,
We're
but it gets
good.
very interesting to
Mhm.
jump in for a moment and say, one of the reactions I've seen through the years is there is this, to what would seem for the surface to be a very odd reaction among people who become frightened at a haunted house. They often attempt to placate, fawn to, or even in some mild form, seduce the attacker.
Ah, I love that. That's a great term, seduce the attacker.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, how that all plays into our psyche and how that has made us who we are, obviously,
Mhm.
without fear, we would not be having this conversation. Something would have eaten us way back when.
Right.
It's a
Right.
necessary thing, but I wouldn't
Mhm.
go so far as calling it a necessary evil. I don't think fear itself is evil. I think it's reactionary, and it's
Yes.
something that we embrace given the opportunity.
Yep, definitely. And it's always wonderful to have these discussions with you. Thank you very much for sharing your information and knowledge on this very unique topic for sure.
It's around that time of year, so
Yep.
might as
Well,
well embrace it.
yeah,
And it's
definitely.
my pleasure. I love coming on here and happy to be your guest at any point.
Yes, definitely. We'll definitely have you back on.
All right. Thank you.
I'd also like to thank the team behind the podcast, Jason Clayton and Juliana Whitten. Thank you for listening to Converse from the Couch. Take care, everyone.